Alright everybody, welcome back to the dojo. One of the things we're going to cover today, we're going to go back over our MASH editors so that we can create MASH networks. Let's get started. I'm going to create, and remember I'm just creating simple primitives, but you can create anything and use it within a MASH network. Do a cube, Control B to bevel, and then let's give that just, once again, just a little bit of bevel on the edge so that when it renders it has a nice visual approximation. Again, I'm going to go to shading and turn on wireframe on shaded. Alright, here in the studio tonight we are listening to Beats Antique, and we are having an AJ Fernandez, what is this, a Pilon Añejo cigar. So we're just kind of chilling, getting in our flow, having a good time. Alright, let's scale that down. And remember, this is the parent geometry of the MASH network, and I can always come back and edit it if I need to. So here in our MASH shelf, I'm going to click the button to create a MASH network. And today we're just going to talk about distribution types. So right now the distribution type is set to linear. I can increase this, of course. There we go. And let's go up all the way up to 100. And then if I play with the distance X, it'll put, like, as you can see, let me zoom out a little bit. And then we'll do that again. Make sure you can see where we're going. It'll put some distance between them. We can play with Z offset. Rotate X. So if we want to give it a little bit of a sort of helical shape, rotate Y. Rotate Z, right? And once again, these are all keyframeable. Let's switch from distribution type linear to radial. And again, we have the same amount, 100. We can play with the radius of our distribution. Again, right click just to keyframe this. We can play with the angle so that if I wanted it to grow, say from a 0 point, whoop, there we go, somewhere about right there, to angle 360 or angle negative 360, I can do that. And then pull it out this way and Z offset again, so we can create a helical structure if we so choose. Now, distribution type spherical, it populates all of our points onto the surface of a hypothetical sphere. And again, I can play with the radius of this sphere. Keyframeable. I can increase our point structure. Let's go to 500. And I can play with a lot. So the angle, so that it goes from a sort of, here you go, a toroid structure, and angle X, I can make it a full 360 degree sphere. And then with angle Y, it's the opposite. We can create a single point and then have it expand out to a full spherical structure. Under mesh, we simply need to input a mesh to populate our MASH network upon that mesh. Now I'm going to do this real quick. Let's create polygon primitive. We're going to do some spheres. Again, we start with a platonic solid. Let's give that platonic solid about 3 subdivisions. Let's crank that radius up. Whoop, little big there. Maybe about right here. And what I'm going to do is, this is something I guess a lot of people don't think of. However, if I duplicate, Control D, this platonic solid, and sort of make these metaball shapes, Control D again. So we're duplicating these, Control D, duplicate again. So I'm just kind of making these random structures like so. I'm scaling them. Let's just have some aesthetic fun here. And I'm going to grab these right here, like so. Let's move them over. I'm going to move them back over, like right here, like that. maybe in a little bit more. I'm going to Control G to group them, and then I am going to modify center my pivot so that I can kind of do this. And then we're literally going to shift select all of these structures. And under our modeling menu, we're going to go to Mesh, Combine, like so. So now it's one mesh. And if under my mesh network I change my distribution type from whatever it was before to mesh, I can input this mesh right here, this Platonic 4, as our input mesh on our distribution. So let's middle mouse drag that over, and boom. Now the cool part is I can grab our original mesh, Control H, hide that, and so I have my distribution set up on this mesh. Now that mesh could be a plane with some undulations. The mesh can be any polygonal shape you want, or any combined polygonal shape that we want. So that is mesh distribution. Let me Control Z that out, and let's just Control H, hide that. Whoops. Let's Z a few more steps, and let's Control H, hide that. Whoops. There we go. Oh, and you too, buddy. You're getting hidden. So next, let's look at another distribution type, and instead of mesh, we are going to do grid. And for grid, we can create vertical, horizontal grids. We can tweak the distance between each sort of level. So let's say we're going to create a cuboid grid. There we go. Once again, I can kind of push these apart. This is all, once again, up to you. And so now you can see I've got a grid of cubes. So that's distribution type grid. All of these values are tweakable, and I can sort of compress things if I want, reduce my grid structure, so on and so forth. Let's say I just want a vertical grid. I can do so like that. Let's say I just want a horizontal grid. Do so like this, and grid X like that. So that is grid distribution. And finally, let's look at volume. We're going to skip initial state and paint effects because those are a little bit longer tutorials. Volume, unlike sphere, volume will populate, as we've talked about in class, instead of the surface of a geometric primitive, we're populating the entire structure of the geometric primitive. So we can switch from point, sphere, and cube, and I can play with the size of that volume sphere. And we can play with the bias, where if we want it pushed to the outside or more pushed towards the center, and again I can right click and keyframe any of these aspects. So that is distribution type in the mesh network. Next up, we'll talk about how we start to daisy chain these things together. As always, remember to smack that like button.